You're sending those notes over. Hey, if you got this part of the video, you've got the live unedited edition, Cyber Frontiers, April 20th, 2020, 420, if you keep track of those things. And we are live. If you're catching this any other time than 8 p.m. in the Central Time Zone on that date, means you got the recorded version. And that's okay. Hang tight. We're going to get started here in just a second. Christian and I are just getting our act together right now. So just hang tight. I want to welcome those I see in the chat room: Joe, Mark, John. Anybody else, if you're out there, there might be one more of you or two. Check in the chat room. Let us know you're there. If you're listening live on Spreaker, we want to welcome you there as well. If you are listening live and you haven't followed us yet on Eventbrite, brand new address, Christian, theaverageguy.eventbrite.com. You can go out there, and I've actually now for 3 weeks got all the live events posted, and it's posted out 3 weeks as well. It's almost like I have my act together. I basically just copied exactly what I do at Gallup. Just brought it here. So not that original, but you can stay up to date. You'll get a 2-day, 2-hour, 2-minute reminder, which is kind of helpful. If you're a forgetting guy like me, I always kind of forget in the evenings, like, oh, when's this thing kind of coming up? And now, like in this new world, Christian, we actually like scheduled this. We had a time, we advertised for it. What the heck?
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, it's pretty inspirational, I must admit.
This week I was, speaking of dun. I was going through, and I'd all these broken links on the site, and this tool I was using actually thought every YouTube video was a broken link, which was a little bit of a bummer. But I went back and checked some of the old ones, and like 37, like Home Tech 37.
Yeah, look out for that one. Big, scary. What was happening on that?
Dude, we're
platform?
On Skype. We're on Skype. There's a guy named Gary on there with us sometimes.
Crazy.
It was crazy times. It was crazy. I had that big old honking microphone. I was reversed in the angle here, so I was shooting out that way. It was so if it was just a different day. It's just funny to go back and watch some of those old ones. One I had totally forgotten about with you was we started the video on a Hangout for whatever reason, and you were there, but nobody else was. And so it was just an empty chair for me, and I think an empty chair for Andrew. So it's the three of us. And you were like, hello, is anybody there? Hello, hello, anybody there?
I think that was one of the ones you guys had a power outage, and you might have dropped. Was it pre-show or was it mid?
No, it was. I think it was pre-show.
Oh, okay.
And I think we had connected, and both Andrew and I had gone to, use the bathroom or grab something to eat or whatever. And it was just you, and you were just like, hello, is anybody there? I totally forgot. So I cut that part out, and I said, you ever see what happens before the show? And it was just you for about.
Do you remember that?
For about 3 minutes.
What episode was that?
I want to say it's like 60.
Oh, that was pretty great.
It's on the YouTube channel. I have to. Oh my God, dude! Because we've been doing this, so it'll be 10 years coming up here this December. Because we've been doing this for 10 years, we have a lot of videos, you and me, like a lot. And I went through almost all of them. I got, at one point, I started trusting the system, and I just started accepting them as not broken. You can kind of tell the system, I'm using this SEO system, and you're like, no, that's not broken. You can just leave it, put it in the database, mark it in the database as not broken. But it's constantly about every 72 hours going through the entire site and checking all the links to make sure they're not broken. So we have, now it's not true, but pretty close to 0 broken links out at theaverageguy.tv, which I guess is super important to me. For whatever, I spent 5 hours working through 500 broken links. It's kind of amazing, Christian, that after 10 years, I had 500. It's a miracle it was only 500. Think about all those shows we did on Windows Home Server that, none of those sites work anymore at Microsoft. They've shut all that stuff down. Like a lot of the security stuff you used to talk about, gone. Gone. Oh, yeah. Ken mentions, give the show a thumbs up. It's down here. So if you're watching on YouTube down there, give it a thumbs up. That actually helps us in the old Google YouTube land, if you want to do that. And if you haven't subscribed, this is our live channel. If you're watching this, you're on our live channel. Subscribe to it down there. That way you get a notification whenever we go live. I want to welcome anybody who's listening on Spreaker as well. Did you send those show notes over?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's bring those up. Boom.
Doesn't mean they're great. It just means you have them.
Usually your mediocre is the best thing I've ever seen.
I don't know. Today it's
it's
questionable. It's questionable.
Let me bring up this. Let's bring up this page because this is how this whole thing started. So I got an email from Bitdefender. I'll bring that up. Okay. All right. What do you think? Can we do this thing?
Oh, we can do it.
Dennis is out there. Dennis Pillow's out there. Dennis, welcome. Glad you could make it out on a Monday Cyber Frontiers night. We may do more of these now that this is like a new world.
It's a whole new world. Yeah.
Is there enough to talk about?
Oh, there's plenty to talk about. It's just where the destination is. Yeah.
Dennis, welcome. Glad you came out to be part of our Monday night show. Join us Thursday as well. Aaron Lawrence is coming Thursday for Home Gadget Geeks. All right. I think we're ready. You ready to do this thing?
Let's do it. Let's see what happens.
Somehow it always just happens. I'm not sure how, but somehow it always just happens. Okay. I should probably sit up. This is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Cyber Frontiers, show number 61, and that's not totally true, actually. Hold on.
Try that again. Number 60, deuce.
That is not true. This is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Cyber Frontiers, show number 62, recorded on April 20th, 2020. Here in Cyber Frontiers, we explore cybersecurity, big data, and the technologies that are shaping the future. If you have any questions, comments, or contributions, you can always send us an email. Send it to me, Jim@theaverageguy.tv. You can always track down Christian at theaverageguy.tv. Find me on Twitter at @Collison. And of course, you can get Christian. He's got a way better handle than me at Borg Whisper. Don't forget theaverageguy.tv, powered by Maple Grove Partners. Get secure, reliable, high-speed hosting from people that you know and you trust. That guy over there. Head out. Plans start as little as $10 a month. Web and media hosting available. Maple Grove Partners. We do it here at theaverageguy.tv. Lightning fast. MapleGrovePartners.com. Stay up to date with everything we do live. I'm trying something new. I know it's crazy, but head out to theaverageguy.tv.eventbrite. And everything we do for the next 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going to try and keep that up to date out there. So if you kind of want to know who's the guest, what's going on, what are we doing, even Cyber Frontiers made it this time, theaverageguy.eventbrite.com. If you register and follow me over there, you'll get a notification every time I post something new. So if you always want to be in the know, you can do it that way. And then there's another way to do it too. If you go to theaverageguy.tv/subscribe, there's a newsletter sign up. And I know I've juked you a couple times by having you sign up and then not sending you anything. Kind of committed to doing it. We'll give weekly updates, or mostly weekly updates will be available for you. Again, theaverageguy.tv/subscribe, because I knew you were writing that down. Christian, welcome back to another Cyber Frontiers. Good to see you.
Thanks. It's good to be back. We're on a roll of quarantine recording, I suppose.
I know. Like, we got to take advantage of the quarantine because it's right. I mean, I pinged you the other day. I'm like, hey, we could do this in 4 weeks instead of 6.
That's right.
And what tipped me off, we're going to talk about digital identity protection tonight. What tipped me off is I got an email from Bitdefender. I kind of use them for my antivirus. I have the Bitdefender box, which like a pfSense box or Untangle or any of those, right? It kind of helps me manage the security of my network here. It's one of the easier ones. Bitdefender box is drop dead simple, plug it in. They kind of manage everything for you. I like it for me because I don't have to mess around with it. That doesn't mean I haven't built my own pfSense box from time to time just to see what's going on there. But got this email from them, which is interesting. They have been kind of getting more into this space, but this Bitdefender digital identity protection. Normally, Christian, we would see this from like LifeLock, right? Some of those companies that are doing this, they're offering it for $60. A bunch of they're offering a bunch of services: digital footprint visualization, continuous identity monitoring, real-time alerts that are out there. I don't think anything new. $60 a year, pretty much in line, I think, with some of the other digital services. But I wanted to get your take tonight. Like, we have talked about this before, and your philosophy is reduce your digital footprint. You're never going to get it completely wiped out as far as being, but do we need to think about, are we in, where are we at today? So give me some, $60, is it worth it? Do I need to go down that route? Give us your opinion.
So it's kind of interesting. I'll actually start with a totally unrelated question. Are you familiar with LifeLock's kind of sordid history before they were bought by Norton?
No, I'm not.
So the FTC back in 2015 had a settlement with LifeLock where LifeLock was, quote, will pay $100 million to settle FTC contempt charges that it violated the terms of a 2010 federal court order that requires the company to secure consumers' personal information and prohibits the company from deceptive advertising. This is the largest monetary award obtained by the commission in an order enforcement action. So this kind of little historical nugget, I think, is mostly lost on the average person that hears LifeLock, right? The LifeLock that you are familiar with from a branding and consumer today looks very different. Well, what's the number one reason why it looks different today? Because it's no longer a parent company. LifeLock was bought out by Norton in subsequent action, kind of as a series of results of the original enforcement action. But the original enforcement action alleged 4 things. The first thing it alleged was that from October of 2012 through March of 2014, LifeLock had failed to establish and maintain a comprehensive information security program to protect users' sensitive personal information, including the things they're supposed to be protecting: their social security number, credit card, and bank account numbers. Second, it alleged that LifeLock had falsely advertised that it protects consumers' sensitive data with the same high-level safeguards used by financial institutions. Third, the FTC alleged that from January 2012 through December of 2014, LifeLock falsely advertised that it would send alerts, quote, as soon as possible as it received it, an indication that a consumer may be a victim of identity theft. Finally, the FTC alleged that the company failed to abide by the order's record-keeping requirements. So that was excerpt from one of the FTC press releases back in December 17th of 2015. And it was kind of an interesting reminder to me how quickly people place their trust in things that claim to be protecting your best interests. Clearly, since that time, LifeLock has had to do a 180. They were bought by Norton. They're pretty much, for all intents and purposes, a completely different company from the company that I described to you in that enforcement action. But the fundamental truth doesn't change, which is that these tools in general are going to help at most do 2 things for you. One, give you a glimpse into your current state of affairs. And what I mean by that really is, what is your current digital footprint or your digital surface area as it pertains to your personal PII? Second, it's going to be a reactive safety net, so to speak, if you fail at your primary mission, which is to reduce your footprint and not be a target. So if you fail, maybe there's this hypothetical, net that, keeps you from falling over the cliff, and it may or may not be enough to actually prevent the damage. When I looked at the statistics on this, I was actually even more surprised. So in 2017, 6.64% of consumers became victims of identity fraud, which quite honestly is quite a bit higher than I would have thought. Typically, when we talk about the odds of an identity theft happening, we're talking about more vulnerable populations, people who are less technically savvy, elderly, or people who are just more generally susceptible to social phishing. And this was a study done by Identity Force. So, of course, they themselves in putting out these metrics have a end game here of why you should read these metrics. What I found more interesting, though, was the second metric, which is overall 33% of US adults have experienced identity theft, which is more than twice the global average. So that could mean a whole bunch of things. It could mean that the US is like more unintelligent on these matters, which maybe, but maybe more likely is that US persons are much more targeted for identity theft and fraud, which in and of itself, I think, has some interesting implications. So, if you live in the United States and you have a social security number, chances are, according to these statistics, if you were to roll the dice in a poker game and hedge your bets against not having some type of identity theft problem in your life, you could be surprised. Now, it's not a majority of people, but a third is, I would say, beyond statistically relevant when we're talking about these types of things. And of course, kind of the unsurprising statistic of it all, how they measure this exactly remains unclear, is that, quote, emotional distress is reported by 77.3% of identity theft victims. I think that number's probably higher. I feel like no one goes, oh, that was a great experience, let's do it again. So I don't really know what the value of that statistic is unless you're really just not concerned about it. Maybe because even though you have an identity theft situation happen, maybe you have good protection, maybe you're not worried about it. I don't know. But the backdrop of this whole thing is that I think what has changed is not the problem statement. What has changed is the solution space. So when you looked at identity theft services back 5-6 years ago, around the time of this settlement, they were predominantly focused on what I call like your data trail. And I want to define that a little bit better. So when I'm talking about your data trail, I'm talking about kind of the things that show up that put together your life with words to maybe paint some fuzzy, hazy picture of like who you are, where you've lived, what your socioeconomic status is, what companies you've placed your trust in or do business with, what addresses are considered billing addresses for you, living addresses for you, what phone numbers have you been associated with over the course of your life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It has not traditionally been the role of an identity theft protection service to care in the slightest about how you secure your personal technology, which is really interesting, right? So here we've been talking about, on this show, we've talked about it ad nauseum, the Equifax breach. We've talked about dozens of breaches on this show where, the compromise of your PII with your social security number and all these other factors pretty much make it a moot point that, quote, somehow your data isn't already out there. But those traditional services that have focused on protecting those things, like inherently, it seems that the majority of Americans who do the right thing, take the right preventative steps, and lose their data anyway, are losing their data because the online services and systems that they're using are inherently insecure. So there seems to be this interesting trend forming where rather than just focusing on protecting the data elements itself, which is what these identity protection companies have done as their historical legacy, they have now moved to being integrated with your antivirus, which on the surface honestly sounds legitimately bizarre, right? Like, what are the odds that you running a particular antivirus that is somehow integrated with your identity theft prevention system is going to prevent the scenario where you go download something bad, that something bad gets onto your computer, is smart enough to steal your PII in a reproducible way, and then your service is going to either neutralize the virus itself, B, maybe not neutralize the virus, but know something went wrong, so that C, it can take some type of preventative action to either alert you, freeze your credit, or do another action. So I got to be honest, on the surface of it, it's a repackaging exercise, I think, right? Like, why is Bitdefender suddenly emailing this to you? Hot take, because Norton now owns LifeLock, right? So these two industries that were once related but somewhat separate are now just kind of collapsing, right? Think about how this used to work with antivirus or with Quicken for this matter. The digital advertising aspect of it is really just truly fascinating. So you used to be able to go to a shelf, whether it was a Best Buy or you bought it on Amazon or whatever, up through 2016, I want to say, you could buy Quicken once. It could do everything you wanted it to do. And you'd be like, sweet, my life's good. I can manage my finances. I don't need to buy Quicken 2017. Why? Because 2016 works just fine. They send me security updates. They send me bug fixes. The data shows up in the register the same way. Like, I'm good. I don't need to upgrade this year, right? So then imagine the people who are like that 8 years later, and they're like, Quicken, still great, works exactly the way I need it. I don't need anything else. So in the advent of moving to cloud, software systems and businesses have had to move to what I call the cloud money model, which is cloud computing runs on a fundamental tenet of pay as you go. What does that mean? It means it's virtually impossible to buy a cloud service that you buy once and use for the course of your lifetime. Doesn't happen. What is Quicken's bottom line and Norton's bottom line and every other antivirus product that you use were used to just be able to pay for it once. You had unlimited license keys and you were rocking and rolling. What happened to their bottom line when all these other business models moved to subscriptions? It started to drop. So what was the answer? Well, we're going to force you to upgrade. I'll never forget, the day I open my Quicken and the window comes up and it says, we're no longer going to give you those updates. It's now time to, buy that annual subscription with Quicken. What is Norton doing? What is Bitdefender doing? So I postulate we take it one step further, which is to say, it's not enough to maybe entice someone to buy a subscription for one service, but what if I can bundle these packages to make you feel like you're getting a really sweet deal from just buying your antivirus, right? It's the same concept as when you have to buy home and auto insurance. Well, chances are you might be able to get it cheaper over the course of the year if you bundle your home and auto. Mm-hmm. So now what I start to see happening in that digital identity service is we're bundling your computer's internet security with your digital identity security. And I'm not necessarily saying that it's a scam or the technologies are bad or they're ineffective. In fact, I've made no statements to or against that point yet. But what I will say from it, just a purely a marketing and a presence standpoint, why did Jim get this email about Bitdefender? Because I am somewhat convinced, just based on early hunches and feelings, that this is a direction a lot of antivirus or digital identity based companies are going to move in, where they're going to want to offer kind of that all-in-one converged capability for you as the consumer to feel like you're protected physically, online, digitally with your consumers. And what would the next logical stretch be? I don't think we're there yet, but what is the next thing? Then these companies start bundling and partnering with people that provide you your physical security. Mm-hmm. So your Wise cams or your Ring doorbell or whatever. And you kind of see what the natural illustration is. Mm-hmm. Joseph out in live chat brings out a great point, which is that like he still has clients that are using Office 2007. Why is that? Number one, it still works. There's nothing like it still works, minus the fact that they really don't security patch that anymore. So I highly don't recommend downloading files from an outside source because you will get owned, especially if it's a macro. But that's besides the point. Reason number two is that most people can use Office completely. Like Microsoft Word is the classic example of this. Why would someone still use Office Word 2007 and be happy as a peach? Because at the end of the day, like, what are the features you really use? Typing in whatever 200 some fonts you want, setting your margins and your page widths, writing whatever the letter or the memo or the thing is, hitting file save, and hitting file print. After that, everything else is just 100% complete, utter gravy. And so look at how like reluctant Microsoft has been to move away from the thing that made them king for the last 3 decades, right? License keys for Microsoft was arguably what made their initial company, grow to the levels that it was able to purely from a revenue standpoint, right? And with Office, it followed that same model as the Windows operating system up till around Office 2013, when you started noticing suspicious integrations with OneDrive and with Microsoft Live Sign-In. And now, by the time we're here in Office 2019, I don't even think you can buy a license key for Office 2019 without signing into Microsoft. You got to like pay for the download. The license key gets linked and associated with the account, etc. But the real answer for most users has now become Office 365. Think of how many laptops where you're bundled into, yeah, we'll give you the first 6 months free and then start paying us the subscription, because which one earns you more money in the long run? Subscriptions. And what's the biggest maybe holdback for Microsoft to keep doing license keys? Interestingly, in this case, it's the enterprise, because for a lot of people that have offline installations where talking to an internet activation server is like not a thing, you have Microsoft KMS, where it's an offline key management server that does those activations. But by and large, they're physical installations done on the boxes in a particular organization. So even these paradigms are somewhat of a precursor to seeing some of these other, I guess, different types of bread and butter applications moving the way of the subscription. Now, this is kind of a far line of thought off of the original topic about identity theft services, but at least it should hopefully paint a high level summary of like how we got here and how the consumer is getting bombarded with all of these types of money making decisions with these products.
Yeah, and you're right. I'm a Bitdefender customer. I already have the Bitdefender box, right? I have this router that manages my Wi-Fi and my physical network. It gives me a level of protection. There's some smarts built into it to help, even if I don't have software installed. It keeps phishing attacks and some of those kinds of things down. I get with the subscription, I get unlimited antivirus. In the antivirus is a wallet, right? Or I could keep passwords. We think of like LastPass. They used to be a sponsor of the show. And so I could keep passwords in that. They have wallets in there that allow me to kind of, when I'm going to banking sites and things like that, and adds an ultimate another layer of security on top of that. So it made sense to me. In fact, I considered it, when that email came in. That's what got me thinking about it. I was like, well, another 60. I'd actually like it if they just threw it in with the Bitdefender box at this point. I'm already paying $99 a year for all those unlimited. I have a bunch of PCs, including my mom's, which, I get the value out of the antivirus, and she definitely needs it, right? So I don't mind paying that. But yes, you're right. We're seeing this. We're seeing these companies begin to, I shouldn't say begin, they're mature in the space of playing end to end from a security standpoint. I had never really thought about the physical security bit coming online with that. If Bitdefender all of a sudden offered some kind of like, hey, attach your cameras in here and we'll help you keep track of that too, I'd kind of go, oh, hey, I could get it all in one place. Maybe not a bad way to go.
Right. No, absolutely. So, now, I mean, let's just kind of walk through some of the top 3 services that are in this area. So top 3 is somewhat arbitrary, I suppose. This is just my intuition on the subject.
Yeah.
We've talked about LifeLock, kind of I would say one of the first players on the block. And let's read the website together. So first one, why you need Norton 360 with LifeLock after a data breach. So that's interesting. The advertising right there is after data breach, which makes you wonder what you're supposed to buy before the data breach. But that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
One, putting a freeze on your credit may not be enough. 1 in 2 customers have been notified of a data breach, and identity theft can happen for years to come. All inherently true statements. I think one argument that they have to make is why purchase them when you almost always get some type of free protection service after one of these data breaches.
Yeah, you could just stack those up, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Like
I
it's
think
as many of them as offered. Are they any good though?
some
They
better
always
than others.
okay.
I mean, I've been signed up for, I think at most 3 at once, which was a truly spiritual experience. But I mean, the notifications were
Yeah.
interesting. I would say the most notifications I got out of anything was sex offenders in your area, which, okay, like interesting, but how it was relevant to like protecting my digital identity, like a whole different can of worms. But
Right.
I feel like, you know, it's the warm and fuzzy features that make people feel happy
Sure.
sometimes.
And
I
easy
don't
maybe
know.
too. And
Yeah,
easy.
right. But like,
Yeah.
that's one of those things where that data is just sitting publicly and you could go look it up anytime,
Right.
but you're not going to. You're too
No.
lazy. But when some computer's like, oh, hey, this guy moved in next door, it's like, oh man, this service, it's top notch stuff. But honestly, the statement, you know, putting a freeze on your credit might not be enough. That is a very true statement, right? There's a lot of other things you can do to someone besides trying to squeeze their credit, right? The season we're in right now is normally a prime time, ripe moment to convince someone that they need an identity theft and protection service. Why? Because it's tax season, or at least it was until people are like, JK, you have until July 15th. So maybe we have this prolonged window of being able to scam people over the course of 3 months. Because for a lot of Americans, having to file your tax returns is like a high stress thing. A lot of people don't know if they're owing, if they're returning. Um, Maybe some people choose to go to a tax firm, some don't. Um, so there's a lot of kind of commotion that takes place during tax filing, and it's an annual opportunity for people to basically say, let me figure out how to take advantage of that fear or that stress of someone trying to do something in a panic, in a hurry, where logical thought really doesn't go into it. It's a ripe opportunity to get a quick win. Um, and that's actually one of the points that I want to stress in all of this, which is that the notion of reducing your surface area is as much about being in control of the realm of rational common sense thought as it is in the realm of things that you can't control, right? So for many of these cases, the victim is being victimized because there is a stressor or an emotional response or something that becomes an easier target for an adversary to be like, I'm going to spend way less time and get way more payout by going after this person. And so, one of the things that I think people should look at that maybe goes beyond even what any of these services are is like, if you were to have a stranger approach you, what would be some of the things they could profile about you? And when I say a stranger approach you, I don't only mean in the physical sense. I also mean in the digital sense, right? Like if I were to log on to see your Facebook profile for the first time, what could I learn about you? Is there enough for me to learn about certain stressors in your life or certain indicators that you might not even be aware of in the course of your normal day to day that makes me think, this is a person that I have a higher likelihood of targeting than the next guy. And so when we talk about kind of the two realms of protecting this data, one, I think by and large is absolutely how are you conducting yourself online? What are the things you're doing, etc. The second has everything to do with how are you hardening yourself against social engineering, which sounds weird, but guess what? Your human brain is the only firmware that you have to upgrade in that process in order to eliminate or significantly reduce the odds of that second category being a problem. And I think that one goes largely underlooked because we're willing to quickly say, you know, don't do this, don't do that. Here's the common flyer of things not to do. a lot of people just don't get that information. It doesn't get circulated widely enough. But two, I don't think a lot of people take it seriously. I think they legitimately expect I can buy this product and it will make the problem go away, as opposed to I will learn the right security mindset. And as a result, I will be less likely to be an interesting target to someone trying to make a quick buck.
Yeah, no, I echo your sentiment about this idea of false sense of security. In other words, I'm going to pay for this problem to go away, when in all actuality, you may be leaving the door open. Even though you have a service like this, you may be leaving the door open if you haven't enabled two factor on everything that you can use two factor on. I mean, I almost, I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I spent the weekend going through broken links on my website. I almost need to spend some time in an audit of going through passwords and security sites and what security are they offering that I may not be taking. Because if I can have one of these protection services on there, but someone gets access to my bank account, it doesn't really stop them if I've left the door open or I'm giving them access. And then I've noticed, like on the banking sites, they're changing stuff pretty constantly to keep up with what's going on. If you haven't reviewed kind of your account details on them, you may be missing some new security that they're offering that you haven't enabled on your account or whatever. And so really there's those two factors, right? There's that one of reducing my footprint, but knowing where I'm at. Do I have a good grasp on all these accounts? Every time, when LastPass used to sponsor us and they'd come on the show, I'd always feel super guilty at the end of the show because I'm like, oh my gosh, I got way too many accounts and I haven't done an account audit on everything that I have out there. Are those sites that I even still need to have accounts on? Things like that. So I do appreciate you kind of bringing up that point of like, are we buying these services? One, is it an insurance policy or are they actively? Because I think LifeLock started as an insurance policy. Hey, we'll guarantee you up to 100,000 or whatever it was, $1 million in losses, whatever that false advertising was. And we bought it more like an insurance policy instead of a helpful partner making sure we're secure. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, and everything I've stated so far, I'm pretty sure I've done a good job of not being a proponent or an opponent of should you go buy these products, because I think
Mm-hmm.
if you use them the right way,
Correct.
sure, it absolutely is going to help you reduce, because just the act of buying it means you're a more aware consumer than someone who is not even evaluating whether or not I should buy the product, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in and of itself, having that, buddy, so to speak, whatever that thing is making you less likely, somewhere in the realm of statistical probability, to be a victim of one of these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
That said, I can't tell you how many people who I know who are definitional tinfoil hats. I think Jim's met some of them. And they've had some of the most horrendous, scary, you wouldn't believe it, identity theft breaches that just make your jaw drop. Like, there was nothing they could have done. There was literally, I mean, these are people that, here's the rock.
Yeah.
Here's the realm. Here's the breach. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, this is the model person in my life for how to be identity conscious, and they still got pwned. So, I don't think that is the common case, but it is the outlier to say that, like all things security, you can do and do and do, and it's adversary versus adversary. So kind of keeping up with the likelihood of this happening is a fool's errand. You can reduce, you can practice common sense. At the end of the day, you absolutely need to be prepared for the contingency that it wasn't enough. And I think that's what, now I'm going into the area of why you should consider buying an identity theft protection service anyways. In another life, I would be a lawyer segment of this show, I would tell you that, these types of identity protection programs, many of them offer like identity insurance or other things that, like, if you need to go into crisis mode and you need a very inexpensive way to get yourself out of the hole that you find yourself in, not of your own choosing, um, these services that you're paying little amounts of money to over time are maybe giving you really big insurance or big defense mechanisms that you aren't aware of. A great example of this is when you go to buy a home, right? Like, what are one of the things you get to decide? Well, typically in a conventional home you buy where you are conventionally financed mortgage, the mortgage company or the lender requires that you buy a lender's title insurance to protect the bank. But guess what? They leave optional for the consumer to choose. Consumer choice. It is optional for you to buy your own buyer's insurance to protect the title in the property. So if someone makes a claim against your home saying, hey, I own that part of your land, or hey, this property is mine because you never paid this $20,000 construction bill 20 years ago. Well, that's a problem, right? Because now all of a sudden you have to go find monies to pay lawyers to make
Mm-hmm.
that problem go away, as opposed to having insurance that's going to swoop in from all directions to try and protect you from that, right? So the LifeLock services and the related identity services themselves might not necessarily be so much about the actual protection they have to prevent it, which we all want. But in the case that you do find yourself with one foot in the mud, it might be about the contingency plan to get back on level footing that's more important.
So
Um,
what you're saying, Christian, it may be pure insurance, is what you're thinking, right? And
Absolutely. Yeah.
from that standpoint.
And you should look. I mean, I have not looked in depth at LifeLock to see what they're offering by way of bundled in insurance or otherwise, but here you go. Reimbursements and expense compensation, each with limits of up to $1 million for Ultimate Plus, up to 100,000 for Advantage, and up to 25,000 for Select. So if you get the standard bundle thing where you get the antivirus, you get the LifeLock, etc., you just bought $1 million insurance policy for this type of stuff and you had no idea, right? So if someone came and swooped all your assets out and your bank account was drained and life was no longer peachy, man, well, guess what? Because you decided to spend $10 a month to get your antivirus taken care of, you also bought an insurance policy. And I feel like that is a very underlooked fact. Like, look at this. Look at the subtext on this website of like reimbursements, each with $1 million limit for the Ultimate Plus, right? Like, if I was an advertising or marketing guy at LifeLock, I would be like, what's wrong with you people? Like, put the big $1 million number somewhere big, right? Because people like big numbers. I would absolutely want to see, if you scroll up a little bit to the 4 different plans that they offer, the squares. Yeah, right here. See, they did do it. I'm not crazy. See, their advertising guy told you exactly what I said they should be doing, which is, to put that big look at the advertising cue here. It's so great. The human cues. It is a person with a hand giving you dollars in an amount of $1 million. Like, this is an advertising trigger if there ever was one. But totally underlooked, I think, when we talk about people want to know how they're going to be protected from it happening. They rarely look at, like, what's the contingency if I get hacked anyway.
Yeah, it gives us kind of gives us a rundown of the features, and it really is. I mean, it is, when you start comparing now. There's so many services. It can be difficult to compare apples, apples to apples, apples to oranges, if you want to put it in that context. And Christian, I don't know about you, but sometimes you buy an insurance policy, like you buy a fridge, and so you buy the extended warranty, only to find out after the fact, like, oh, no, you can only file these every third Wednesday when the year ends in 9, and you start getting these all kinds of kind of exceptions. And what turns out, what you thought was kind of some blanket coverage, oh, no, we don't cover it if it's a Russian hacker, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Like, what are your thoughts on that? As far as, I'm not asking you to give legal advice at this point, but
No, I think I will say there is generally a big divide between insurance policies that insure equipment and insurance policies that insure people's livelihoods, and generally they are two very, I would say, differently crafted documents. I would hedge that you're going to have a slightly better chance proving that you are a victim of identity theft under some broad or very specific legal clause than you are going to be able to prove that this refrigerator is truly broken and falls under a warranty clause, right? There are different scopes of impact. So, for example, if you have flood insurance and your house gets flooded, well, there's probably not going to be many clauses that say it had to come from the sky, or if it was rain that came from Kansas and then came into Washington, D.C., well, that water, that can flood you all night and we won't cover it. So from that
Yeah.
perspective, I think it's harder for them to hide and duck behind that type of thing with these services. That's not to say you shouldn't read the fine print, but I'm
Well,
generally more bullish on these being more protective than equipment based
yeah.
warranties.
We won't dwell on this, but we had some incidences here in Nebraska last spring. We had some bad floods, and we had individuals who had insurance. They were not in a flood plain. Now they had water damage insurance. So in other words, if the house flooded, it would be covered, but it would had to come from the inside of the house. Right. It couldn't have been from a flood because they weren't in a floodplain. Right. And so there was, we had some major issues with them getting, things fixed because they weren't necessarily in a recognized floodplain. So what's the FTC have to say on this? I mean, certainly they've got to have some prescriptive advice, thinking through this. Is the government involved in this? I mean, certainly from a legal standpoint, they back in 2012 they put the smackdown on LifeLock, but are they staying engaged in this?
I don't know as if they have a big of a skin in the game when it comes to insurance enforcement. They're much more focused on, like, for example, the reason why FTC would have been involved in enforcement action against LifeLock is because false or misleading advertising is a communications issue. It clearly falls in the jurisdiction of FTC. But an insurance related thing, a bit murkier, you would expect that a DOJ type department would have to go after something like that. Maybe there's a Consumer Finance Protection Bureau involved, or maybe there's another government agency more aligned to insurance specific issues. For example, your bank insurance is heavily regulated by the FDIC, is kind of the classic financial insurance example. I don't know specifically who is pulling the strings and protecting enforcement of identity theft insurance. Although I will say you have to imagine that it's pretty well scrutinized, given that the government breaches that have happened where they've had to extend identity theft protection to people, they have to understand those insurance policies pretty well in order to be able to offer them to people as a free thing. So if you go to the FTC website that you brought up, Jim, it will overview like what is identity theft insurance, should you get this insurance, etc. I don't believe it goes into at great depth, what are the things you should look out for a good insurance policy versus a bad insurance policy, other than to say that, typically they cover these realm of things, and if you need to get extra protection, they'll cover these realm of things. They do make an interesting note that says the insurance generally doesn't reimburse you for any stolen money or financial loss resulting from the theft, which is a pretty important thing. Like, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
Does that mean if someone empties your bank account that, yeah, you're probably going to go to the FDIC to get that insurance reimbursement versus the identity theft insurance? So it really is focused on kind of this illustration that I gave earlier, right? Where someone comes and says, this plot of land that you have your house on, I own it, and here's my claim to that land. And you're like, oh, well, wait a second. Now I got to go find a legal team. And then before you know it, it costs you $50,000 to go defend yourself in court. That's what the identity theft insurance is protecting you from. It's protecting you from the bailout of putting people and resources in motion to get you back on level footing. The actual monetary things that are covered, such as, I had $200,000 under the pillow, and someone figured out my social security number and my PIN code to my door and got it, or got into my bank account and took it. Not covered.
Identitytheft.org is right now today, because I did all these broken links this weekend. I'm sorry, .gov. What did I say? Org?
Yeah.
Okay. .gov. Thank you. Identitytheft.gov. It could change. I did all these broken links this weekend, and it's amazing things we said just 4 or 5 years ago that have already changed, especially in the area. You and I did a show on when you first started college. We did this show on all the services available, scholarship, how to apply for student loans, a lot of those kinds of things. Oh, that's all changed. It's all changed. Like none of those were all broken. So for today, identitytheft.gov, this document we're showing, I'll have a link in the show notes. Actually pretty helpful. And I think in one of the areas where there are free services that are available. Now, the government makes them available. They got a lot of pressure on them to do this, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And this started getting out of hand. I've had to use them. I've had some, I had somebody come in through TeamViewer and set up some withdrawals going to other accounts. We were able to get all but about $50 back. So it wasn't that bad of a deal. But so I fall in that category, by the way. And since then, I've deleted every like TeamViewer does not stay, even though they've patched it. LogMeIn, TeamViewer, Rescue, any of those never stay on my computer very long, right? They come and go pretty fast. But there are some free services available that the government provides for you as well. One of the things, FDIC, right? You mentioned that earlier. I have a banking background. FDIC covers you when the bank fails, not when your money gets stolen. So it's not an insurance policy against those kinds of things. It was really, FSLIC, which was the savings and loan arm of that was set up way back in the 60s and 70s to or maybe 50s and 60s and 70s to protect savings and loans, and then eventually failed itself and had to be bailed out. And all that was, the U.S. government came in the late 80s, early 90s and bailed them out, and then lumped that all back into savings and loans, went away. They all became savings banks. They all fall under FDIC. That was when those institutions failed, not necessarily the failure of you to protect the funds or the bank protecting those funds. But Christian, there's big incentive now for these companies. We think, especially in the United States, because the U.S. government has put such a heavy hand on credit card companies to accept or to put the onus of responsibility on them, not on the consumer. Like, so in the United States, for the most part, if you have fraud on your credit card, lots of times that's covered by the credit card company as opposed to you taking the loss for that. I don't know how long that's going to stay around for or how long that's going to actually last.
Well, I think I want to dig a little further, because most bank policies will protect you against funds being stolen in a savings account as long as you, the consumer, responsibly report it. So, for example, if you tell your bank right away that there was a fraudulent charge or issue that you picked up, no liability. If you notify them within 2 days, $50 worth of liability, etc. $500 if it's within after 2 business days, before 60 days. And then once you fall off that 2-month cliff, you have unlimited liability, meaning like if you didn't notice that $100,000 was missing from your bank account, guess who's going to be repaying that $100,000? You.
But that's not that's not FDIC. That's their own. They have their own fraud policies associated with those. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Good observation.
Yeah. No, and not that nobody cares. That's like saying, well, who's paying for that? The hospital or the insurance company? Nobody cares.
It's
right?
Baked in. Yeah. Right, I don't know if the bank considers that insurance, and if they pay insurance to offer that type of protection.
I think most of them do. Yeah. Right. To cover those losses associated with it. It's been a while. I haven't been in banking in a long time, but they have policies, and it's an expensive business. I remember, I've been out of banking for 15 years, and it was expensive 15 years ago before we had everybody online. Back then it wasn't as many and it wasn't as much, but point being, right, I think in all of this, just as we discuss it, is as a consumer, I think it's important to dig in and be like, if you're going to have a significant amount of money in your bank, it might be a good idea to understand, because I bet those policies have changed in the last 10 years. What are you responsible and what aren't you? And how do you have that protected? Right. And a lot of times they're not going to come in and rob it from the bank. It's gonna be an online transaction of some kind. You've left the door open, at Christmas time, I left my cars open. Somebody came through them. They didn't steal much, cables. I got lucky, but sometimes you leave the door open, right? And it's good to know what those policies are. You might want to check in with those individual organizations that you have that money at and say, hey, what is your theft policy on this? And just at least understand it. It does seem to me to be one of those things that if you just check it once or maybe once a year, just follow up with that to say, like, what are your policies, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's straight on. I mean, I would say when it comes to the identity piece, how often should you be checking in your identity? I think 6 months is a sweet spot,
Yeah.
right? Of
Yeah.
like doing that kind of holistic review of everything. But if you remember towards the beginning of the show, I said, one of the other cases of why it might not ever be your fault, and why, you know, why does the US have, twice the global average of identity theft? Well, it might be because the system that you inherited was designed to fail. And what do I mean by that? Our entire government built a national identity tracking service, for lack of a better word, for every citizen based off something that was not supposed to do anything more than track your history of payroll and wages. And that's the social security number. If you think about the weird fact that a social security number came into existence in 1935, long before the internet, almost let's do math, 35 years before fundamental notions of DoD
At least.
ARPANET were coming into
Yeah.
view, and even then they didn't really know what it would turn into today. So you're really talking close to 50 years before the age where identity theft online becomes an issue, right? um, that's a long time for a system to be designed that inherently was never meant to be the digital ID of a citizen, period. And Carnegie Mellon did this fascinating study back in 2009. It's an article that probably would be lost on most of all of us today because it was published 11 years ago, but you can go back and find it in their archives and or in Ars Technica. Quote, new algorithm guesses social security numbers using date and place of birth. So, what do we know? The first three digits are based on this, birth criteria. The second two digits are based on a group number. And then the last four digits are supposedly handed out at random. Well, guess what? Now they've built this machine that's honing in on the likelihood of the numbers that it could be. Now I live in a digital era where I can put the kind of other elements into play as to how might I find the related information for making that probability go even higher to my favor, that I'm going to get the right demographic data, etc. I'm sure since these articles came out, the Social Security Administration did a little scrambling, did a little thinking about how they issue numbers. They're probably feeling good about whatever the modern state of affairs is. Truth be told, at the end of the day, there's still plenty of social security numbers issued that even if they had redone everything the day after that article came out, it doesn't matter because you still have, millions of Americans that are based on the old way that you issued numbers. And then on top of that, I just don't know how to tell people that, 9 digits is not like AES 256-bit GCM encryption. It just isn't. So the likelihood of not only coercing that number through the means of, understanding the algorithm that produces it, but much more likely coercing a human to provide you that number is a very easy thing to do. And we see it all the time. I mean, what do you type into a 1-800 number when you don't have your 4-digit PIN for your account? or the last four digits of your social security number, beep. And so I think if we thought about identity very differently today, right? Like if you had a smart card that you were required to present to anyone you did business with in this country, where you had to send your digital hardware certificate um, to a representative in order to do any transactions, the fraud would be cut by numbers like you wouldn't believe. And all these identity services, as great as they are in like helping reduce your visibility and footprint, at the end of the day, the number one, big key in to socially engineering anyone on the phone is your social security number, because all the rest of it, as soon as I get it, man, and I got a great story behind why I'm just missing that one little thing, and I sound like a really nice guy, and the customer is always right, and I'm not a jerk about it, I'm well spoken, I'm patient, I can keep them on the phone as long as I want, I can ask to speak to their supervisor. Man, you put them on the hot seat and you got 90% of the right data, and you'll watch the policy exceptions fly out of the other end of the phone. And so none of that would happen if, for example, please enter your smart card, please plug in the smart card in your computer to digitally validate who I'm speaking with before moving forward. And then, of course, people would say, well, all I would have to then socially engineer is, I lost my smart card. I don't have it. Well, it would kind of be the equivalent of saying I lost my social security number. Like, we can probably engineer some solutions around that. But moreover, I mean, think about whatever that backup factor is that maybe is as significantly complex as a smart card. I don't mean complex in terms of how it works. I mean complex in terms of the cryptographic information required. My backup method isn't going to be telling the agent on the other phone a 256 character sequence of A through G with numbers. It just isn't, or A through F. I apologize. It just isn't. And so,
but how great would it be if your social security number had two-factor?
It would be fantastic. But I mean, this is the point, right? Like, maybe we can't fix the underlying broken system, but maybe we can build better systems around it until the underlying system becomes meaningless and gets shut down. I mean, it is the same concept as I hear these horror stories about, how the IRS basically still runs on COBOL and some really amazing assembly language. And you guys think I'm joking, but like the fundamental mainframes that run these types of things are still like, go look at job ads on Google for, all of a sudden they need to find coronavirus hits and all of a sudden they need to find COBOL developers. Well, why is that? Because the systems they need to go cut and edit to give you a stimulus check and do all that validation and compare it against your tax returns is sitting in some COBOL source code somewhere that is processing that data. This was the same thing we talked about back when, I was in college, where we would do the IBM Master the Mainframe challenges. Why? Because you'd be shocked how much still runs on the IBM mainframe. And like, they're not the mainframe that your grandfather worked on by any means. They're modern day mainframes, but they are in the mindset of how those machines were developed. And you look at some of the stuff they're doing and it's like, oh, that's pretty illuminating. And so when you think about just how many systems we still have that are in that, pre-cybersecurity mold, it seems to me much easier to build new systems around the old ones and then eventually turn off the old ones.
Yeah. It's April 2020. We're in the midst of a pandemic. This is just a perfect world for scams. Like when we think about, we're just worried about getting sick and going to the hospital. And of course there's folks out there scamming. As we kind of wrap things up, Christian, I want to throw this up. You threw this in the show notes, and I just kind of want to remind folks that the scammers are alive and well out there, and really, and reducing your digital footprint from a scammer now. It sounds like, right, the emotions are running high. People want to help, right? They want to help, be a part of these things, but we definitely have some things going on. Can you kind of just briefly go through? I think just to remind everyone, like, hey, watch for these things that are coming out. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I put this here because while I use tax season as the original example of why this is a popular identity theft season, coronavirus is the equivalent of when people come out of the woodwork for a natural disaster, right?
Yeah.
How many people were scammed into giving their money to something that didn't go towards Hurricane Katrina? I can tell you it was a lot. And so this is kind of the same thing where it's like you're going to get there's been a deluge of calls. You kind of see it up on the screen, right? There were a lot of people getting texts that were disinformation. Number one, just being like, there's gonna be a mandatory lockdown in your state, etc. And that may in and of itself not have been a scam so much as to kind of sow the discord needed to then pull off a scam or otherwise. But these are pretty obvious ones listed here. Know who you're donating to. Don't just randomly wire money somewhere. Watch for emails that claim to be a government entity or website. Hang up on calls you don't recognize with people asking you for information. Ignore offers for vaccinations and testing kits, and don't respond to text, emails, or calls about checks from the government. This website says because the details are still coming together, but they probably should update that page, right? I mean, the details are pretty much there, but like when the checks weren't really, when people are like, oh, I'm getting a check, but how, who, what, where, when, why, how, there are plenty of scammers that are willing to tell you who, what, where, when, why, how.
Yeah.
And, my very simple advice that transcends this that I practice all the time is I can't tell you how many phone calls I get where I have stopped. I don't answer with my name anymore, even. Like, how many times can I pick up the phone and call someone and they say, hello, this is Jim or this is Christian or whatever. Even that little bit of information, if I'm 90% there and building your profile, and the last thing I want to do is verify that this is in fact your phone number, and all I have to do is pick up the phone, call, you tell me, and then I hang up. It's kind of not good. So the quickest way to not become a victim of a phone related scam is to say good morning or good afternoon. Who am I speaking with? Because that puts all the onus back on that person on the other end of the line to start explaining why this phone call is taking place. And if it doesn't sound right, chances are it isn't. So ask more questions. And typically, while most things will advise you to hang up, which is wise, sage advice, if you're a little bit more academically into the art and sociology associated with scammers, you will find the more questions you ask, the more you learn about how they think. And so I love asking questions. I will ask questions to the death. It's quite exciting. I think it's as exciting for them as it is for me. And I feel like at least if they've wasted my time, we can have a mutual experience wasting each other's time. I suppose maybe someday on Cyber Frontiers, we'll have to do this experiment live. It's quite fun. I guess John says it best. Why are you even answering the phone? I suppose that in the area of coronavirus, when you are conducting business or transactions that go to third parties, phone sadly is still the way you get a hold of people.
Yeah.
1-800s, we live and we die.
Well, or you're in a situation where time is of the essence. You're expecting some phone calls. They may be coming from numbers you're not familiar with. You don't want to let those drop or go to voicemail because it's going to be hard to get a hold of that person again. So there's probably some of those situations where you do want to. I'm with John, to be honest with you. I don't answer my phone anymore, which is terrible. In fact, I think I even say in my voicemail, if you don't leave a message, I won't call you back, or something like that. I just don't actually, I'm not even sure what my voicemail says, to be honest. I don't even know. Maybe one of those, I get a lot of robocalls, but that's about it. And they just kind of go, I think I put my personal cell number on a do not call, and that did a pretty good job of cutting that one off. Now work, whole different ball game. I ended up on lists somewhere, and I get 3 calls a day that just go to voicemail, and I don't even worry about them. Christian,
Yeah.
anything else before we wrap it?
No, I mean, I think that pretty much sums it up for me. I'll just say that kind of in the conclusion of what we set out to answer, has identity services changed meaningfully in the last few years, and should you care? I would summarize it as the fundamentals haven't changed. The way they've bundled and marketed them to you have changed. Oftentimes, if you find yourself paying for a VPN service and an identity service and an AV service, you should probably look into that bundle, because chances are, if you want those services anyway, you can get them for cheaper by using the modern economy of how these things are sold. The underlying technologies have not fundamentally changed in the last few years. They are not a bulletproof mechanism by which you will protect yourself from identity theft. They certainly can help educate the consumer, reduce your surface online, and give you some tools and mechanisms, if you are a victim of identity theft, to not have to pay a lot of money to dig yourself back out.
Yeah. And I think I use AAA. I'm a AAA member, and I think they offer some as part of their plan that works okay. I signed up for it. I go out and check it from time to time. Does it hurt to have more than one? If you had more than one?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Again, it just comes down to like an economy of scale thing.
Yeah.
For example, if you have 2 free services, don't cancel them. They can only help you.
Yeah.
If you want to pay for 2 services that have the specific features, all the more power to you. I wouldn't advise, my go out strategy to someone would not be like, you need these 2 services. It would really just be, like, if these are the types of things, like, for example, I think it's a great thing for people to have VPNs. And if you don't have the ability to implement your own, or you want a lot of VPNs to connect to, I think it's totally reasonable to advise someone to go get private internet access in a VPN. And if they don't already have that service and they're not already paying for identity theft service, it's a great opportunity to say, hey, have you looked at this service? It's going to give you all 3 things in one that you're missing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I see it.
And that's an area I use Bitdefender. They haven't bundled them yet. So their VPN service is one charge. Their AV is another. The Bitdefender box is a third. And now this identity protection is a fourth. It was a good subject. I got that in the mail. I pinged you. I was like, hey, can we talk about this? Like, this sounds pretty interesting. Somehow I always figure, like, how are we going to come up with an hour of material? And we always do.
Always
Couple
do.
comments. John had said I used the LastPass credit alerting, switched to this when I was using the one I was using, didn't catch me opening up a new credit card, and LastPass alerted me even though I hadn't signed up. So that's pretty great. I didn't know, by the way, LastPass. I'm one of their premium guys. Maybe I should look into that. We were talking about answering the phone. Dennis said, or Joe said, I like to keep a soundboard at close reach to answer scammer questions. The Arnold Schwarzenegger movie quotes is always helpful. You're talking about keeping them on the line, Christian, doing some of that. I think some of them have gotten kind of savvy to that and hang up pretty fast. But Dennis says, and welcome, Dennis. Thanks for coming out tonight. I have a police whistle that works great for scammers as well. I do when I do answer, and I don't do it very often, but when I do and I get a person on the line, it is a little bit of a thrill to continue to just hold them on. You and I didn't we do a live?
We did the Cox. Yeah, that was fascinating.
That was fun.
It was
fun.
It brought joy to my heart.
We had a good time doing it. Well, a couple reminders on the way out. Don't forget, theaverageguy.tv, powered by Maple Grove Partners, both web and media hosting. So if you're a budding podcaster, maybe you're thinking about creating a podcast, nobody does that better than Christian over at Maple Grove Partners. Get secure, reliable, high-speed hosting from people that you know and you trust. For more information and plans that start as little as $10 a month, Maple Grove Partners. I think you got a little bandwidth, Christian, to take on some new customers.
We got some bandwidth. Lots of storage, lots of bandwidth. The newest pipe we opened up is 4 millisecond latency to all the data centers that you know and love.
Yeah.
So we're continuing to expand.
And redundancy, right? We now have some redundancy in the system. So
yeah, well, so most shared hosting providers are providers in the tier service cost-wise that we offer. I think we offer a far superior service for the price point of what we ask for people. It's not your 1-800 number experience. It's really curtailed to you. and you're working with people like me. So hopefully that's not a pain in the ass experience for you. And if it is, I'm sorry, that's who you're going to get. But we offer, with the direction we're moving in, we're going to be offering live DNS failover for free, which typically is not a free anything that you get in a shared hosting or a VPS like environment. So that means it is somewhat, someone might be like, oh, isn't that what I pay Cloudflare to do for me? Yeah, kind of, but they do much more like caching as a mechanism to protect you from going down. Our solution is actually if one of our sites goes out, your DNS records are auto failed over to the other site. So it is the equivalent of kind of disaster recovery type engineering that you would see in much larger scale websites and companies that are, running their website in maybe 5 or 10 different geodiverse locations. So it's a nice way to get higher availability without paying extra for it.
Yeah. If you're thinking of starting something new, contact Christian, head out to maplegrovepartners.com. Check it out. It's worth it. Capacity's there. We've been there forever. I think the average guy.tv has been hosted there in some form or fashion for all 10 years we've been doing this. And so check that out today. Don't forget, if you have a question like I did, you could send that to us and Christian would probably answer it. Send us an email. You can send it to me, but why would you? Send it to Christian at theaverageguy.tv. Again, you can track me down on Twitter at Collison. This is at Borg Whisper across from me over there. Don't forget, stay up with everything we're doing live. You can now follow us on the new Eventbrite page, The Average Guy, all one word, theaverageguy.eventbrite.com. You can also sign up for our weekly, or I'm calling it mostly weekly. That gives me a little slack, Christian. That's legalese, right? That mostly weekly. Mostly.
Yes.
And I'll send you kind of what's coming up, and every once in a while, if something cool is going on in my life, I'll share it with you. Sign up at theaverageguy.tv/subscribe. By the way, all our RSS feeds, everything you ever want to connect, any way you want to, is on that page. It's just all there. It's all available for you. Lots of great stuff. Christian, it works great because it's hosted in Maple Grove Partners. We want to remind you, if you enjoyed this, share it. We're kind of going to be back on a regular basis, although every time I say that, I jinx it. So I'm going to knock on wood, and we'll get these things figured out. We are live whenever we feel like it, and but I will be posting them on the Eventbrite page, so make sure you're following us over there. If you're listening live, stay around for a little bit of post-show. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.
Good night.
All righty. Well, there you go. Another Cyber Frontiers in the can. Any questions out there, chat room? You guys did a nice job tonight. Dennis, good to see you out here. Joe, thanks for your notes. John, thanks for chiming in as well. And Ken was out there a little bit earlier. I think he had dinner that he needed to go to, so he couldn't stay. Thanks for coming out. Yeah, I have not gotten any scammer, any of this coronavirus scam stuff yet. I haven't seen it yet. I'm getting a ton of political ads. Maybe that's one of the same.
Must be an election year.
Yeah, not a lot being contested in Nebraska. So it's not like a year where we're just getting inundated. But I get one thing a day, probably, Jeff Thornberry or John Kennedy. Yeah. I don't know if that's his. I don't know if that's his real name. I think that was a president.
Was a president. Yes.
We do have a Kennedy. I think his name is Mike, though. I think it's Mike Kennedy, who I got the flyer from today. It's funny. So my daughter's not quite as conservative as I am, and I'm pretty moderate, but she's not so moderate. So she has to make some political commentary on every single piece because, Nebraska is a Republican state. So we just get inundated with it. She makes funny commentary on it all. It's just hilarious. I just love it. It's one of my favorite things about them canceling school. And hey, speaking of that, say this had happened a couple of years ago when you were at University of Maryland, would this have been your senior year or even your junior year? You lose a semester or at least half a semester to this. Do you think Maryland's ready for this? Do you think they'd be able to? Well, I guess they're experiencing it right now.
And I can tell you some interesting things.
Yeah.
They moved to pass-fail grading for the semester, which is interesting because it means by default, for all the classes you took, it's pass fail, but then you can also ask to not have it be pass fail if you are doing well, so
Yeah.
that if you are like a student that's submitting to med school, honestly, it's not going to look good if your organic chemistry class was just
Yeah.
pass
Pass
fail,
fail.
right?
Yeah.
So I guess that's a take it or leave it. From what I understand, it's been a disaster in terms of students being able to get back into dorms to pick up stuff and
Mm-hmm.
move out for the year,
Mm.
especially when the stay-at-home order in Maryland happened. So there's been a lot of inconsistent mechanisms for people to go in and get their stuff and get out. I think the online learning environments are Maryland has invested a lot in that. I mean, I think it's not catching schools like UMD by surprise that online learning is a thing. So I don't think you go to a school like UMD to pay for all online learning instruction. I think the tuition model there is very different. Um, so as a long-term means of how they would operate, I think it's no good. But I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
for this particular scenario, they're doing the best that they can. I'm not convinced that they're doing anything that's uniquely stellar to what other schools have had to do.
Yeah. We were fortunate when Samantha, when the school announced they were going completely online, they said, okay, dorms are going to be open this Saturday through next Wednesday. Pick a slot and come pick up your stuff. And we got right on, and she got a Sunday slot, Sunday morning, and we drove down there, picked up her stuff. It was a carload. She's pretty light, she's a light traveler. We didn't have bunks to deal with or rented furniture, or we had a fridge, a microwave, and some clothes, right? She's a pretty light traveler.
Mm-hmm.
So we went down and picked it up, and that was easy. And I think they're going to refund. They've said they're refunding half of room and board at this point.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars out of the out of the university. I think they're expecting 180 in the state of Missouri now, not in Nebraska, because she goes to a Missouri school. $180 million shortfall just from this semester alone. Not to mention the summer, some of the summer programs and some of those things. And there's students saying, like, well, if you're not open in the fall, I'm going somewhere else. Like, this doesn't make any sense to finish here if I can't. Well, I'm going to go to a school that has a better online program. So could be interesting. Like, if that does happen, we know summer's canceled for most schools. They're going 100% summer at this point.
Yep.
Online for the summer. If say fall, because schools tend to be a little, they'll err on the safe side rather on the aggressive side, right? Could you imagine how messy that would be if there was a corona breakout in the fall at a campus? What a mess, right?
I feel like one of two things is going to happen. Eventually, the whole population is going to build up immunity to it over the course of these waves, or there's going to be either a vaccine or a cure.
Yeah, no. It's just how long does it take for either one of those to happen?
Right.
Like the vaccine or the herd immunity, whatever that's going to be. But how could this fundamentally change the supply and demand and the for online learning if students start now evaluating this summer, like, okay, I have a shot here. If I got to go online, I might as well go to a school that's good at it. Like, oh my God, how does that change the college landscape? I've always been afraid, in my recruiting around the country, I've gone to a lot of schools, talked to a lot of people, worked with a lot of students. I'm pretty embedded in how all this works and the finances of these schools. And I've always been worried about all these schools spending all this money on programs and buildings and in counting on the crack money that was one, master's students from other countries, and two, tuition that while the undergrad in a lot of schools doesn't pay that much, it does pay some. The fees alone are sometimes what float universities in that. What happens if that gets disrupted? And before January, we could never imagine a world where that money flow gets disrupted. Guess what? Like, how long is it before we start seeing some university systems drop off the planet and go, you know what, we can't open?
Well, it's
We
interesting. It's kind of an acceleration, though, of the too big to fail tuition mentality, too, where university
Mhm.
tuitions just keep going up and up and up with no end in sight. This might be a premature forcing function for that if it does get prolonged past one semester.
Well, her Sammy's tuition is $562 a credit hour because we're paying out of state.
Mm-hmm.
It's 262 if she's in state.
I was gonna say I know that story pretty well.
Yeah, no, right on. I'm paying your prices for her to go to that school. But today I had this thought. We were out for a walk, and I asked her, could you finish somewhere else? Because I said, well, how are you feeling about fall? She's like, I don't know. I said, how do you feel if it's 100% online? And that's where she mentioned to me. She's like, a lot of students are saying if the fall is online, they're gonna go somewhere else. Well, man, that all of a sudden, what are the hot schools for online? And are they geared up and ready for this if they get 100,000 students that all of a sudden realize that Arizona State is the best online college in America? And what happened? I'm not saying it is. I just made it up because I love saying Arizona State. What happens? Is there a competition to get into Arizona State in the fall like there is for Harvard?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know if I want to know, to be honest. I don't know.
Dude, it's just crazy. We have seen here in Nebraska, and I know this is going on all around the nation now. We have seen a bunch of the small liberal arts schools that couldn't make it. They haven't. They've closed, right? Yeah. They've gone under. I'm just kind of wondering what kind of damage this will do. I've kind of felt like the university system was a big bubble on its own. And then what does the government do with the $1 trillion in student debt that exists out there when you have students who exit into a job market that doesn't exist? What are they going to do? Yep. It's those cascading effects that worry me. It's it's not this coronavirus. We'll get through that just fine. We'll figure this out. We're smart. It's the cascading effects on the economy when you think of it. And nobody thinks about the billions of dollars that are generated every year in our college systems. Going to college, it is a multi-$100 billion industry every year that could implode on itself come September, August, whatever of 2020. So it's interesting. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, but certainly as we think about it, and my own daughter, all she wants to do is finish, Christian. And I imagine if you had been in this situation, she's a junior. So no, she'll be a senior starting this fall. So she's a junior right now. She's thinking, my God, it doesn't even matter if she walks to graduate. She doesn't really care. She just wants to graduate. She's put all this time and money. We spent a bunch of money on this thing, right?
Can't blame her there.
What would you have done? What if this happened to you? Junior year, senior is looking like at least half of it's going to be online. What would you have done?
In terms of stay versus switch schools, or just general?
Yeah, just run the scenario from a school perspective. Run the scenario. This is your junior year. You could probably have easily finished the semester. It's already started. You're in classes. It's going to be pass fail. Some will be grades. You don't really, you care, but doesn't matter as much to you. Senior year, well, and then there's the question of what happens if your summer internship got canceled, because that's happening.
Which is the reality for a lot of people this year.
A lot. Our honors program at University of Nebraska at Lincoln, that was like the program, the ACES program. Okay, I say that's loose. Okay, it's very loose, but let's just say it's like it. Okay. Those students normally have internships that are nailed down and ready to go, and they're hard to get, and I could never get any of them. This year I got an email. Hey, we have 15 of the 35, half have been canceled. And they're available. Anybody want them? You're a sponsor to the program here. Do Do you want them? That's unheard of. So, anyways, what do you think you do in your scenario? Say your junior year, this happens. Fall is going to be canceled or going to be online. Do you stay?
Yeah, I think at that point, if you've crossed the junior year boundary, you need to figure out how to stick it out and finish your degree pedigree there. If you're in a field where it matters, right? I think in computer science, for me, getting it from Maryland was important to me. So I would have stuck it out.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, you would have made a way.
I might have ramped up my remote work hours for sure. If it was going to be pass fail online courses, I'd be all over the clock and hours field. But
University Northwest Missouri State offered what they called a safety net. So you still get grades, but if you had an A or a B, it was impossible for you to drop one grade below that. So if you had an A, worst grade you could get as a B. If you had a B, worst grade you get as a C. And you could raise them. So you could always raise them. And so that's even that, that's different than pass fail, but it removes, if you have an A in the class, why not? Unless you're worried about a scholarship. She's not. Right. So she's like, I'm going to put my time into classes where I was not getting as good at grades. So, God, it has just changed the whole economy on thinking about college. And I'm getting 2 emails a day now from former interns who told me no, that are now saying, hey, is there any chance I could come back?
I find that more interesting.
Huh. Yeah.
Have you had to say no?
I have to. Yeah, we don't have any available. And it's not my decision. Yeah. It's not
proverbial we.
Yeah. We don't. We made a financial decision we have current interns who are on staff that still have jobs, so they're still working for us. And we'll be working, normal hours during the summer. The new ones we had to say no to, which is tough. It's hard to say those words. I know we said, but we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and darn, like that's God. It's reaching so many different corners now, and each week it rolls to it hits a different set of circumstances and people, and has these ripple effects over time that you didn't. I heard a statistic this morning: 25% of all small businesses, however you define that, are going to fail, like within the next 2 months. They just can't survive this. They can't survive this kind of lack of cash flow. Well, that's a lot of, 25%. That's a big number of when we think of all the small businesses in the United States. That's a big number. That's going to have a ripple effect. That's going to be interesting. Now, here's the good news. I think we're pretty good at restarting those things. And it gives a whole bunch of entrepreneurs a chance to start something new. I think there's going to be a whole bunch of new things that pop up, a whole bunch of new services.
Yeah, I've been explaining it as the economy will need to retool.
Yeah.
It'll be a retooling exercise.
Yeah. I mean, things that weren't important before, like you can't get a webcam right now.
Unless you order Wise cams and flash the webcam firmware, then you can get a webcam.
I love that you know how to do that. That's so awesome. Yeah.
I also just I bought more of them and I flashed them with the there's an out of band firmware for Wise products that supports the real-time streaming protocol. So my biggest pet peeve with Wise is that like they have this great app, but then you can't access the cameras from a browser or a desktop app. And this pretty much lets you do that. And it's officially supported by them because it's like their firmware that they made. It's just not updated as often as the mainline firmware. So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And it works fine.
Yeah. Who would have thought PC sales would have come back? Like who in a million years you can't buy a PC these days, monitors. Joe's saying in the chat room, like in some places it's hard to find monitors. It's just a whole different It's a whole different. Tell you what, one of the things that has been interesting. So my backyard backs up to, I have a neighbor, and then neighbors on either side, and neighbors this way, and it's all chain link fence. So it feels like it's one big yard. We have just low chain link, and it's great. I got great neighbors. I have some of the best neighbors ever. And typically, though, for the last, I don't know, forever, it's always me in the yard. Like I'm the one on the deck. Like my backyard's 4 times or 6 times bigger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times bigger than my yard because my neighbors are never in their yards ever, except now. Like it's crazy to go out on the deck and everybody's in the backyard. Everybody's out there. I mean, we had a beautiful weekend this weekend weather-wise. We got snow on Thursday, but it was 70 on Saturday. So snow was gone. It was great. And everybody's out. Are you getting in your neighborhood, or are folks out?
Yeah, there's been a ton of people. People have discovered the wilderness once again that they live in. It's pretty great.
There's walking trails. We've just like some magic person laid concrete in these forests.
Eisenhower was a good boy.
So great. These were built during the highway, the national highway system.
He said he was a descendant of the Mayans themselves. It was the natural follow-on work to the Great Pyramids.
Oh my God, that is so great, Christian. That might be one of the funniest things you've ever said. Yeah, it's just I'm on my deck, so usually, I can go out there and enjoy a cigar and be alone. And my neighbors are all out there. I feel bad about smoking a cigar out there. I'm like,
tell them to wear a face mask, then you'll be fine.
What are they thinking of? Like, what do they think? Because before I felt private. I felt like I owned the neighborhood. Nobody ever came outside. Now everybody's outside. It's bizarre, old world.
Yeah,
I don't get it.
I think it's great. I think people are going to be healthier for it.
Yeah. How's your hair's getting longer apparently as well? Yeah.
I don't know what to do about it. I don't feel the need to have someone cut it for me that's not licensed to do that.
No,
I have a guy, and he's like the only person in the world allowed to touch my hair right now. And I just feel like I'd rather let it grow out super long in a pattern that he knows how to fix than have it like start from ground zero. So
yeah. I won't either. I won't. I can. So I can, when I have a beard trimmer, and I can get the stuff on my ears here, so I can kind of keep that kind of at bay. But this is getting long. I may ponytail this thing if we go long enough, or do the slick back like Phil Jackson from the '80s Lakers. Just start slicking that thing back. It could look pretty. It could look pretty good. Yeah, you're never gonna get to a barber again. John cut his own hair. John, he's still out there? Yeah, he's still out there. He did his own self cut this weekend.
I can't do that with these luscious locks. It doesn't work that
way. He's gonna do his second. Well, here's the deal. Like, if you did cut your own hair, you think we're probably we're still 6 weeks out from being able to get a haircut. You think 6 to 8 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just say it's 6 to 8. We're not. We don't know anything. It's just okay. If you cut your hair every week, 1, there wouldn't be as much to cut, and 2, you'd get better at it. I'm just saying.
Maybe.
I can't do it. I can't. I have this nightmare. When I was in the military, we got deployed kind of under emergency circumstances, and the first sergeant pulled us all aside and said, "Okay, you need a haircut. You need a haircut. You need a haircut." And I'm giving it to you. And he just did the biggest butcher job. And I just couldn't live with myself for a whole month before I could do anything about it, And when I got back to base for Christmas break, I went into the barber to get a cut, and the guy goes, I sat down, he goes, "Oh my God, who cut your hair?" He was like, this is, he could see it. I mean, it had grown out for a month and he could still see the damage that had been done to my hair by my first sergeant. So John said it didn't blend it well. Well, John, you will get better. Each time you'll get better at this. And I want to see some pictures. He was really good to send me some pictures. And I didn't think it looked bad. I thought on his style it looked pretty good. You got a grill in your new place, Christian? Are you grilling?
I have a little
Little hibachi,
a porta grill. Yeah, it's a coal fire. But,
oh man. Okay, we gotta.
I'll get the pro rolling soon.
All right,
Don't worry.
all right. Sounds good. If you're joining us live, thanks for coming out tonight. Good to hang out with you guys on a Monday night. I hope we've made your quarantine a little more bearable on a Monday evening, and appreciate you guys doing it. Don't forget, for the couple of you that are left, Home Gadget Geeks, Erin Lawrence is coming in. She's got some great products. We're going to go over kind of a more traditional gadget show on Thursday. And I didn't mention, I should have, Mike Howard. We lost Mike Howard on Sunday to cancer. I think everybody who's in here knows that already. But boy, that was a tough for me this morning. That was a tough loss. He's such a good guy, and you know, one of those guys that's kind of been with us from I think from the beginning, Christian. I think he was around for the early days of Home Tech. Yeah. And we helped him start JPEG to RAW. So thinking about his family and those things today as well. So it's a big hit for the community. It's going to happen. That's one of those kinds of things, but sure appreciated him and thinking about his family tonight. So appreciate the good word that you guys all put into Facebook as well. So we will see you guys on Thursday for Home Gadget Geeks. Take care.